The Atlantikwall, or Atlantikwall in German, was an extensive system of coastal defenses and fortifications, reaching from the south of France to the northern parts of Norway. In some areas, the defenses were quite formidable, whereas in other areas they were lacking. In this video I give you a short overview on the French parts of the Atlantikwall, and then show you how an individual infantry division was set up for a coastal defense. Let's start with the basic principles of the German defense. The German High Command analyzed amphibious operations in Italy in 1943 and concluded that the most successful way to defend against an invasion was to destroy the enemy landing force as soon as possible. The plan was to deploy strong forces in the coastal area in fortified positions. These positions should be stacked properly to provide a deep defense, supported by local reserves for a counterattack. The units were ordered to hold out until the end. This should provide enough time to mount a strategic counterattack with motorized units. To give you some direct references, the German Army Command in the West and its commander Generalfeldmarschall Rundstedt noted: "Unser Vorfeldhindernis ist das Meer, der beste Panzergraben," which means our first defensive obstacle is the sea, the best tank ditch. Furthermore, he also noted: "Im Bereich West gibt es kein Ausweichen. In the area west, there is no evasion." The last directive was probably influenced by the fact that the chances of surrendering were considerably higher on the western front than on the eastern front, because it was known to most German soldiers that they were treated quite well by the Western Allies. Thus, surrendering was a viable option to German soldiers on the western front. The German generals were aware of this, and it was quite troublesome for them. Since we covered the basic principles of the defense, let's take a look at the higher level organization. Among the German commanders and leaders there was a consensus about the general defensive strategy, but there was some serious debate on how the units for a counterattack should be deployed. There were basically two approaches: a decentralized approach, in which motorized units were located closely to the front lines, and a centralized approach, whereas a large group of units was stationed farther from the front. In early 1944 a decision was reached. One part of the tank divisions would be stationed close to the landing areas, and additionally a central reserve would be deployed in Paris. The whole discussion and planning of the defense strategy was almost exclusively performed by army commanders. The Navy and Air Force were not really considered. So let's take a look at the construction of the Atlantikwall. The construction of the fortifications initially was mainly aimed at freeing up soldiers for other front lines. Yet this changed in fall 1943. Up from that point, more focus was put into providing a strong defense against an upcoming invasion. The German High Command assumed an attack would be most likely in the Calais and Le Havre area. Thus there was a strong regional focus on these areas. The regions Normandy and Bretagne were of less importance, but everything else in France was of minor importance, and very little fortifications were planned and constructed there. The construction of the Atlantikwall required a large amount of construction workers. Although many foreign workers were transferred into Germany, in June 1944 still around 140,000 non-Germans and 18,000 Germans were used to build up the defenses of the Atlantikwall. And a large part of these workers were used to repair damages from the Allied bombing campaigns and the French resistance attacks. Let's take a look at the total numbers. Until the end of 1943 around 8,500 fortifications and emplacements were constructed. Until the invasion, about 12,200 fortifications in total were finished on the western French coast. Additionally, 500,000 beach obstacles and 6.5 million mines were placed. These fortifications were equipped with a large amount of artillery, anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns. In the Normandy region there was often a lack of resources and workers, thus even some large guns were without proper fortifications. Yet in the areas where the Germans anticipated an Allied attack, the fortifications were numerous and well protected against bombing attacks. Now the chain of command and the authorities were quite complicated due to regional, functional and other structures. Some of these structures may have been useful, but often it was more about the prestige of some commanders. I'll spare you the details and just give you an example on how the various relationships of the 2nd Panzer Division looked like. The division was part of Panzergruppe West. Operationally it was under the authority of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Territorially, it was under the command of the military administration in Belgium and northern France. And in terms of supplies, it was attached to the 15th Army. This layout was not an isolated case. After all, German bureaucracy is like war, and war never changes. Let's take a look at the quality of the troops. The units that manned the fortifications of the Atlantikwall were mostly second-rate German infantry divisions, the so-called bodenständige Divisionen, which were infantry divisions intended for static defense. They only had a very limited amount of transport capacity, no recon units, and usually only 2 infantry regiments instead of 3. Furthermore, they often lacked properly trained NCOs and officers. These units were also often equipped with various captured equipment, thus of lower quality and complicating the logistical situation. In total, around 25 of these static divisions were present since fall 1943. Additionally, various units were transferred to France to be regrouped and reinforced there. Yet usually these units were extremely depleted and exhausted, thus they were of limited use, especially since they often replaced other troops that were transferred out to other front lines. The motorized divisions, which should constitute a counterattack, were limited initially. In fall 1943 only 2 were deployed in France, yet this number increased to 11 divisions until June 1944. About 5 of these units were sufficiently equipped, but the 6 others lacked tanks and other equipment. In total there were about 1,860 armored vehicles available at the time of the invasion. Before we take a look at the defense layout of an infantry division on the coast, some information about the overall state of the German Air Force and the Navy on the Western Front. The situation was dire and it got worse. The Luftwaffe was unable to provide proper defense against the continuous airstrikes from the Allies. Furthermore, in May 1944, the Allies focused their bombing attacks on the German fuel production, which considerably limited the ability of the Luftwaffe in its mobility and training. In case of an invasion, it was planned to transfer several air units from other areas. Yet still, that would only bring the total number of planes to around 1,650 operational aircraft. At the same time, the Allies had more than 9,000 aircraft available over Normandy during the invasion. This air supremacy of the Allies also prevented almost any operations of the German Navy. Due to the detection by the enemy radar, the German ships couldn't leave the harbors without being faced with immediate air and naval attacks. Thus, deploying naval mines in a systematic fashion was not possible. There were German plans to mine the coastal regions in Normandy, but the Allies successfully prevented these operations early on. Now let's take a closer look at the defense layout of the coastal region that was defended by the 384th Infantry Division. It was a bodenständige Division, thus intended for static defense. The coastal area defended by this unit was about 30 to 35 kilometers in length. On the northern flank, the 344th Infantry Division, and on the southern flank, the 245th Infantry Division were deployed. The division consisted of 2 infantry regiments. One regiment defended the northern region and the other the southern region. There were numerous emplacements and defensive positions. I don't really have any clear information about them, but I assume most of them were fortified with concrete. The southern region contained a company of a coastal artillery battalion, or Heereskustenartillerieabteilung, and an army artillery battalion, or Heeresartillerieabteilung. As far as I know, these battalions were not part of the division itself, which had its own artillery regiment. A total of 14 batteries of these units were deployed at the following positions. And furthermore, there were another 3 batteries of 10 cm artillery pieces. Now, there were various static defenses and obstacles. First off, there were a few minefields. Now you know why they needed 6.5 million of these little bastards. Additionally, there were 4 areas protected by hedgehogs and another 5 areas that used ramming logs. Some of these were located in the water or directly on the beach area. And finally, one area was protected by an anti-tank wall, which was the location of one of the headquarters units. So let's take a closer look at those. The headquarters unit of an infantry regiment was located at the anti-tank wall, which is located right behind the forward area of defense, and is also well centered. The same goes for the 2nd Regiment headquarters in the south. A little bit more behind, but again in the center, is the divisional headquarters located. which is also at the position of the headquarters of the artillery regiment and the signal battalion. Now there were 5 areas for reserves, 4 of the divisional reserves and 1 regimental reserve. The only regimental reserve was located very close to the front line in the north. A little bit more behind was a divisional reserve area. Then there was a large reserve area next to the division headquarters, where a company of assault guns and an anti-tank platoon were deployed. There was another reserve area next to the division HQ, and one in the southern area close to the front line. To summarize, the Atlantikwall wasn't an impenetrable defensive line, nor was it just hollow propaganda. The quality and quantity of the defensive positions varied a lot, and it was closely related to the German commander's assumed invasion location, which was not Normandy. The strategic reserve to counter an invasion was deployed as a decentralized reaction force in combination with a centralized mobile force to perform counterattacks. Due to the Allied air superiority, the German Air Force and Navy were basically incapable of providing any substantial contribution during the preparation against the invasion and the invasion itself. Furthermore, the constant airstrikes severely reduced the amount of the available workforce due to the need for repairs that couldn't be spent on constructing fortifications and obstacles. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe. And see you next time.